Have you ever found yourself in the middle of a mundane conversation, but feeling like you were on another planet? Have you noticed expressions, hesitations, or silences that reveal truths that no one else seems to perceive? It's as if your eyes see invisible cracks in other people's smiles, as if your ears pick up the pain behind gentle words. Then the question arises, why do I feel so much, while others remain indifferent? This heightened perception, that makes you notice contradictions, masks, discomforts, might seem like a gift at certain moments, but it frequently transforms into a burden that's difficult to carry. There are days when it would be easier to be like everyone else, accepting things as they appear, without questioning or feeling excessively. And yet, something inside you refuses to numb your consciousness. That something wants to see the truth, even when it hurts. The loneliness begins there, when you perceive emotional nuances, hidden patterns, and the shadows that hover in environments, but discover there's no one to share this clarity with. As if living consciously meant living apart, in an internal space that only you inhabit. Instead of finding understanding, you encounter looks that minimize, advice to not think so much, as if your sensitivity were an exaggeration. Gradually, learning to hide what you feel becomes a defense mechanism, and silence becomes your only companion. This is the loneliness that's born not from a lack of people, but from an excess of perception. It's not the emptiness on the outside, but the distance that opens between who you are and what the world seems to want. Do you feel this way too? It's intriguing to realize how loneliness doesn't simply dissolve through the presence of other bodies around. Have you ever been at parties, family gatherings, or work meetings, feeling like a stranger observing everything from the outside? Even while laughing, participating, and trying to fit in, the feeling of isolation remains, as if there were a thin film separating you from everyone. This loneliness, silent and cutting, doesn't depend on how many voices echo beside you. It's born from the absence of essential affinity, from the lack of true connection with someone who understands your most intimate concerns. Because there's a gigantic difference between being together physically and feeling seen, welcomed, recognized in your essence. How many times have you caught yourself smiling to avoid questions? How many times have you accepted invitations just to avoid admitting to yourself that, deep down, you preferred your own company? In these crowds, loneliness becomes even more painful, as it reveals that what hurts isn't the absence of contact, but the superficiality of bonds. It's as if everyone kept dancing in a ballroom lit by artificial lights, while you carry a flashlight that reveals cracks in the floor, loose wires, risks of collapse, details that no one else seems to notice or want to see. And so, even surrounded by voices, you feel condemned to an inner silence that no one hears. The crowd, for those who perceive too much, doesn't offer cure, but only reinforces the difference between presence and connection. After all, being together doesn't mean being close. There exists a type of silence that goes beyond the lack of words. It's the silence that reverberates when you try to share your deepest reflections about life, death, the meaning of everything, and realize that your words find no echo in any attentive ear. It's like throwing seeds on sterile soil. They fall, but nothing blooms. Have you ever felt that frustration of opening up and realizing, through the other person's vacant stare, that your most sincere questions generated no movement? Or worse, that they only caused embarrassment, as if thinking with such intensity were a deviation to be corrected? In moments like these, the fear of becoming inconvenient grows, of driving people away with the weight of your own lucidity. So you retreat, fall silent, keep to yourself thoughts that could be bridges, but that transform into walls when they find no resonance. This silence isn't peaceful or liberating. It's a space where your reflections echo alone, repeating questions that no one helps answer. You wonder, why do I see what I see? Why do I feel so deeply? Why doesn't anyone else seem bothered by the world's contradictions? And in this echo, loneliness becomes denser, almost tangible, filling the hours with the feeling that no matter how much you try, no one really understands you. It's in this void of listening that conscious loneliness reveals its cruelest face. Not the absence of voice, but the lack of someone who wants and can listen. In every human encounter, we seek more than words. We long to be recognized in our totality, seen with a gaze that pierces through appearances. But, for those who perceive too much, the other's gaze often functions like a cracked mirror, reflecting only distorted fragments of who we are. Then emerges a subtle and constant pain, that of being interpreted based on expectations, stereotypes, or conventions that have nothing to do with one's own essence. Have you ever felt that no matter how much you tried to explain who you are, the other person seemed to see only what they wanted? As if your depth were reduced to labels. Too sensitive, dramatic, complicated, cold. This experience wounds silently, as it shows that even the other's physical presence doesn't guarantee true perception. Often, we feel like pieces that don't fit anywhere, even when we try to adapt. This sensation is like walking in a corridor of broken mirrors. Each reflection shows a part of us, but never the totality. And upon realizing that no one seems willing to put the pieces together to see the complete image, loneliness intensifies. The conscious soul yearns to be seen without distortions, but discovers that this clarity is rare, and that almost everyone prefers the simplicity of illusions to the complexities of being. This is the loneliness that's born not only from silence, but from the mismatch between who we are and how we're perceived. And so, even beside those who love us, we can feel that we're alone in our essence. When consciousness expands, perceptions arise that change how we see life, people, and ourselves. It's as if, suddenly, we could see with clarity the hidden dynamics in relationships, the unspoken intentions in every gesture, and the contradictions between discourse and action. This lucidity brings an initial sensation of power, of finally understanding how things really are, but soon reveals a weight, that of carrying alone the truths that many prefer not to see. Have you ever noticed how people who think little about their actions seem lighter, even when making choices that hurt themselves or others? Those who allow themselves to live on autopilot seem to suffer less, as they don't question their own motivations or perceive the subtle consequences of each decision. Those who develop consciousness, however, inevitably begin to wonder why family relationships are so full of painful repetitions, why there's so much competition disguised as friendship, why we're capable of sabotaging ourselves even when wanting to be happy. These questions don't have simple answers, and often lead to discovering pains that were hidden beneath routine. Expanded perception makes you recognize, in small signs, when someone is acting out of fear, envy, or neediness, even if that person swears otherwise. You begin to notice social lies that sustain the normal. When a coworker compliments but secretly hopes for failure. When someone says, "everything's fine," but their tone reveals hurt. When family gathers and everyone avoids talking about things that really matter to maintain superficial peace. Each of these perceptions accumulates, creating the feeling that living consciously is like walking in a minefield of painful truths. This clarity also turns inward. You begin to perceive your own inconsistencies, stored resentments, insecurities that shape your choices. This can generate deep anguish as it becomes difficult to ignore what has become evident. Many try to go back, wishing for the old lightness of ignorance, but consciousness, once expanded, doesn't retreat. At this point, it's common to feel that no one else understands what you're experiencing, as few people share this lucidity. The loneliness of realizing that, while most seek distractions to avoid thinking, you feel the need to understand everything in depth emerges. This need distances you from superficial conversations, makes social gatherings lose meaning, and even makes old friendships unbearable due to lack of sincerity or depth. The expansion of consciousness reveals realities that bring suffering, but also opens space for genuine growth. It's in this paradox that choice emerges. Use this lucidity to judge and isolate or to embrace imperfections, yours and others, with compassion, transforming the weight of knowing into wisdom. As consciousness expands, so does the perception that what one feels and thinks might be considered exaggeration or drama by those who live more superficially. This fear of being seen as complicated or problematic makes many sensitive and conscious people begin to silence their deepest emotions and reflections. Over time, they learn to filter what they say, carefully choosing words to avoid seeming strange. This process, almost imperceptible, gradually builds a habit of silencing the essential to preserve appearances and avoid conflicts. Have you ever caught yourself swallowing questions that arose in the middle of a conversation, for fear of seeming pessimistic or too intense? Have you ever felt that, If you express the truth of what you feel, you might drive away important people or generate endless discussions. This forced silence isn't just absence of words. It's a self-sabotage mechanism that undermines one's own authenticity. By denying what one perceives and feels, one begins to doubt one's own worth, questioning whether one might really be too sensitive or abnormal. This strategy of staying silent initially seems to protect from rejection. However, over time, it transforms into internal prison, as it prevents the creation of true bonds. After all, how could someone truly love or understand you if they only know the part you judge acceptable? This mismatch between who one is and who one shows creates a loneliness that's independent of the number of people around. Moreover, constant silence feeds the feeling of inadequacy, as it reinforces the idea that being sensitive is a defect to be hidden. This shame of feeling deeply makes many strive to adopt colder, more distant, or even ironic behaviors, trying to fit into groups that value superficiality. But this effort only increases the pain, as it requires denying what's most authentic in oneself. Perceiving this self-sabotage is fundamental to interrupting the cycle of loneliness. The first step is recognizing that feeling deeply isn't a sign of weakness, but of connection with one's own soul and with reality. The second step is allowing oneself, gradually, to share what's inside with people who demonstrate genuine interest, even if they're few. Thus, sensitivity can stop being a reason for isolation and become a source of more sincere and transformative relationships. From early on, we're exposed to messages that associate personal worth with the idea of emotional strength. Don't depend on anyone. Don't show weakness. Those who need others are weak. These phrases, repeated at home, at school, in movies and songs, shape the belief that being strong means not needing support, not showing vulnerabilities, and not revealing doubts. This model of strength, however, often serves to hide loneliness, transforming it into something apparently admirable, but deeply destructive. How many times have you prided yourself on solving everything alone, even when feeling the urge to ask for help? How many times have you answered everything's fine when, in truth, anguish weighed so much that you couldn't breathe? This behavior creates armor. On the outside, the image of someone secure and unshakable. On the inside, the constant fear that, if you revealed your fragilities, you'd lose respect or be abandoned. This emotional armor doesn't emerge from nothing. It's the result of experiences where showing emotions brought criticism, humiliation, or rejection. Faced with this, the mind learns that opening up is dangerous and, as a form of protection, begins to exalt independence as the ultimate virtue. However, this forced independence prevents the construction of real connections, as there's no intimacy without sincere sharing of fears, pains, and insecurities. The culture of strong and independent is also reinforced by social standards that devalue sensitivity. In professional environments, for example, those who demonstrate feelings are seen as unprepared or unstable. In emotional life, coldness is confused with maturity. This context feeds the idea that depending emotionally is synonymous with immaturity, when in truth the capacity to trust and ask for support is one of the greatest demonstrations of courage and maturity. By calling loneliness strength, many end up perpetuating cycles of silent suffering, as the more they avoid showing themselves, the more they isolate. And the more they isolate, the more they need to appear strong. Breaking this pattern begins by recognizing that true strength isn't in closing oneself off, but in having the audacity to be authentic, ask for help when necessary, and build relationships where there's space to be imperfect without fear of rejection. Expanding consciousness is usually seen as something exclusively positive, as if seeing more were always liberating. However, Carl Jung reminds us that everything that grows unbalanced, even the light of consciousness, can become destructive. When perception expands without emotional integration, lucidity stops being a path to wisdom and becomes an unbearable burden. And, instead of bringing closer to meaning, it distances from life. Have you ever caught yourself thinking so much about everything that your mind seemed never to rest? Have you spent sleepless nights reliving conversations, analyzing details that no one else noticed, trying to anticipate every possibility to avoid being caught off guard? This excess of lucidity creates a state of constant tension, as if it were necessary to always be alert to protect oneself from disappointments or avoid mistakes. Instead of bringing peace, consciousness transforms into a source of anxiety, feeding a cycle of thoughts that consume energy and joy of living. Another risk is becoming excessively critical, both with oneself and with others. When one perceives human contradictions clearly, the temptation arises to judge everything and everyone, including oneself, harshly. The ability to see flaws can become inability to forgive. Gradually, the analytical gaze transforms into a lens that only focuses on what's wrong, creating bitterness and the feeling that nothing and no one are good enough. This is consciousness's shadow, when the desire to understand everything becomes compulsion, and what was once a search for meaning becomes a source of suffering. The person begins to carry the weight of all contradictions they see, without being able to transform them into something constructive. An even deeper isolation then emerges, as the bitterness created by this excessive lucidity makes it difficult to maintain light dialogues or spontaneous relationships. That's why Jung defended the importance of integrating the shadow, accepting that perceiving more doesn't mean having to carry everything alone, and that lucidity without compassion becomes just another form of prison. Consciousness, to be a source of growth, needs to be balanced by the humility of recognizing that imperfection is part of human nature, and by the capacity to embrace oneself and others with patience. Those who develop broader consciousness frequently live divided between two conflicting impulses, isolating themselves to protect from excess stimuli and frustrations, or exposing their perceptions to try to awaken something in others. This tension makes many oscillate between long periods of silence and moments when they feel the need to speak, share, or even alert those around them. Have you ever felt tired of the world, preferring to withdraw to avoid dealing with empty conversations or environments that seem to drain your forces? And, at other moments, felt an almost uncontrollable urge to tell what you perceived, explain what's behind appearances, try to help someone see beyond? This alternation is very common in those who see more than most, as consciousness amplifies not only understanding, but also the emotional weight of what's perceived. The hermit emerges when the person decides to protect themselves from the emotional wear that superficial interactions cause. In this state, they seek silence, solitude, and introspection as ways to maintain their own sanity. Withdrawal can be necessary and healthy, but if prolonged too much, it transforms into isolation that feeds sadness, resentment, and the feeling of irreversible disconnection. The prophet appears when the pain of seeing the world repeat destructive patterns becomes unbearable, awakening the need to speak, whether writing, advising friends, or expressing ideas on social networks. It's the moment when consciousness seeks to transform lucidity into service, attempting to contribute so that people awaken to their own contradictions and sufferings. But if this posture isn't balanced, it can be perceived as arrogance or pessimism, further driving away those one wanted to help. This duality between isolating oneself and wanting to transform the world generates emotional exhaustion, as it rarely finds immediate resonance. The hermit feels alone, but leaving silence to speak seems in vain. The prophet speaks, but becomes frustrated with the resistance of those who prefer to remain unconscious. Recognizing this tension is essential for those who live with sensitivity and lucidity ablaze, as only accepting this ambivalence allows finding a point of balance, knowing when it's time to withdraw to care for oneself and when it's time to share to build bridges of consciousness. Up to this point, we've seen how perceiving beyond the common can lead to profound loneliness. But there also exists a transformative possibility, that of using this pain as fuel to develop wisdom and compassion. Jung said that the individuation process, becoming who one really is, involves recognizing one's own shadow and integrating it, accepting that loneliness is part of the path of self-knowledge. When we accept loneliness not as punishment, but as a space for reflection and healing, it becomes alchemy, an experience that transmutes the weight of excess consciousness into loving lucidity. Have you ever noticed that, in moments when you were alone with yourself, you managed to perceive truths that were previously covered by daily agitation? Silence, when consciously embraced, reveals emotional patterns, old hurts, and beliefs that shape your attitudes. This process is painful because it forces facing parts of yourself you'd like to deny. But it's also liberating, as it offers the chance to heal deep wounds. Transforming loneliness into an opportunity for growth requires changing how it's interpreted. Instead of feeling rejected or inadequate, it's possible to see loneliness as an invitation to internal listening. What still hurts in me? What do I repeat in my relationships that makes me suffer? What can I learn about myself by perceiving that I expect from others what I'm not yet capable of giving to myself? This self-listening develops not only wisdom to deal with one's own life, but also compassion for those who still can't see their own shadows. When we understand how difficult it is to perceive and integrate internal contradictions, we become more patient with others' limitations. Thus, lucidity stops being a reason for isolation and becomes a bridge. It's the ability to understand others' pain without judgment, offering genuine presence and embrace. In this sense, conscious loneliness is an alchemical process that, when accepted and worked on, transforms the suffering of perceiving too much into inner strength, serenity, and empathy. It's not about denying pain, but allowing it to teach us, making us more whole and prepared to create authentic and meaningful relationships. Expanded consciousness can, for a long time, make it seem like there's no one capable of understanding what you feel and think. This is one of the most painful aspects of conscious loneliness, the belief that one is condemned to walk alone. But, in many cases, what maintains distance between sensitive people isn't lack of affinity, but mutual fear of showing themselves. When both become accustomed to staying silent to seem normal, they become invisible to each other, even when side by side. Have you ever felt, in an apparently simple conversation, that there was something deeper in the other person, as if they also saw beyond, but hesitated to reveal themselves? Small signs, like the way of listening, the gleam in their eyes when dealing with more intimate subjects, or questions that escape the superficial, can indicate someone who also feels too much, and who might be seeking connection as genuinely as you. Opening up is the first step to breaking isolation. This doesn't mean exposing everything to anyone, but having courage to, little by little, share your perceptions with those who demonstrate real interest. Instead of only talking about what everyone comments on, like news or daily banalities, you can introduce reflections that touch deeper. Have you ever felt displaced among many people? Do you also find yourself thinking about details that no one else seems to notice? These questions, when asked with delicacy, function as invitations for the other to also open up. Finding kindred souls doesn't mean seeking those who think exactly like you, but those who value truth, sensitivity, and the search for meaning. Such relationships are rare, but deeply transformative. In them, loneliness stops being prison and becomes shared space, where lucidity isn't a reason for shame, but for union. Over time, discovering people who also see beyond brings not only relief, but enthusiasm. The feeling that it's possible to walk with someone who respects your way of feeling the world. In these relationships, a trust is born that strengthens both, making the burden of consciousness lighter and the path of self-knowledge more beautiful. After recognizing the loneliness that accompanies expanded consciousness and understanding its paths of transformation, it's essential to bring this to daily life. After all, perceiving more only becomes a source of strength when we learn to embrace what we see instead of fighting against or denying it. For this, small practices can serve as a symbolic embrace, helping you integrate lucidity and sensitivity in a healthy way. First, reserve daily moments of conscious silence. Not the bitter silence of isolation, but the silence that embraces, where you sit with yourself and observe thoughts and emotions without judging them. This practice, inspired by meditation techniques that Jung valued in his explorations of the unconscious, helps create internal space to organize the whirlwind of perceptions. Second, write regularly about what you feel and think. Putting your concerns, reflections, and discoveries on paper creates a bridge between mind and heart, diminishing the feeling of confusion and loneliness. Writing acts as a faithful mirror that allows seeing emotional patterns and, over time, perceiving your evolution. Third, seek groups, readings, or spaces where there's openness to deep themes. Self-knowledge circles, therapies, study groups about analytical psychology or philosophy can offer encounters with people who share the desire to see beyond appearances. This search shouldn't be rushed. Quality is more important than quantity in connections. Fourth, cultivate self-compassion. Remember that seeing more doesn't mean having to carry the world on your shoulders. Allow yourself to be human, with limitations and contradictions, just like everyone else. This helps avoid the trap of wanting to control or solve everything alone, freeing you from the weight of perfectionism. Finally, know that you don't need to walk this path without support. The ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes, offers practical exercises that can help you in this process. Check it out in the first pinned comment. And if this content touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and like the video. This way, you'll continue receiving reflections and practices that can help make your consciousness an ally, not a burden. Remember, even when everything seems dark, there are others who also see and are seeking, like you, to walk in a more authentic and whole way.